All right, guys, we've got a hand here. We're actually going to do this one without a solver, which is not very common for me because I really like the use of solvers. But this one's such a clean illustration of some of the important ideas that we've got from our toy game work that it needed to be included. Anyways, and so this player opens 70 bigs under the gun. I flat 60 on the button. This is one of the reasons why we're not going to look at this in solvers, is because big blind overcalls. We've got a three-way pot. I could definitely solve this, but it's quite tedious, and the bet sizings are going to be quite limiting. It's going to be a model in the end, so it's not going to be precisely like real world play. So we're just going to get my opinion here. So it checks to me, and for people that don't know much about multi-way pots, you for the most part want to be checking a pretty weak range as the in-position player in multi-way pots, and you want to bet the vast majority of your strength. So I bet here, which is very standard. No one's really going to argue with it at all, really. As far as my sizing choice, betting small is very common also. We've got high nut ratios for both players. Both players can certainly have trips, which is going to make betting really big, pretty expensive, considering you can run into hands that are damn near dead. So I think small sizing choice is going to be a reasonable one. We get called. Turn's going to be a mix for me. Barreling sometimes is obviously reasonable, but barreling at a pure weight is incorrect. There's going to be an allocation of Jack X combos to the checking component of the strategy here. That's a guarantee. It's not my opinion. That's a fact. So if you solve this, that's what's going to happen. So there's going to be, Jack X that barrels for sure, and Jack X that checks. I'm going to use a randomizer to regulate my frequencies. I elected to check, and my opponent bets. And in this situation, I think it's totally plausible that my opponent has Jack X. Certainly, it's plausible that my opponent has some alternative hand like aces, kings, queens. 6x is still possible, and bluffs are obviously very reasonable as well. So my opponent can certainly have a wide range here. My opponent could even be, my opponent could be value betting down, with tens or something like that. I wouldn't be surprised by something like that. But nonetheless, the nut ratio, the fraction of my opponent's range that is a jack, is quite high. And I don't think that that's very disputable, particularly when my opponent bets somewhat large like this. The fraction of my opponent's range that's going to be a jack is going to be quite high. So, what nut ratio am I expecting here? To be honest, I don't know. I don't know, but I expect the nut ratio to be I expect this to be one of the higher scenarios for nut ratio for my opponent. And again, if you recall from the toy games, when we're evaluating our raising strategy and our opponent's nut ratio is extraordinarily high, how do we get value from the non-nut component? We use small raise sizings. So I deployed this. Do I know this is the right sizing choice? I don't. I don't know. It depends just on how polarized this bet is. Maybe my opponent's bet to this size includes more kings and queens and aces than I think. Maybe it includes less Jack X, and I think maybe Jack X is betting larger a little bit more often or something for this player. I'm not really sure. But again, keep in mind, this hand did start out, three ways. My opponent can fold the flop a little bit more. Hands like sevens, eights, they can certainly check the river. Same thing is true about tens. The parts of his range that I beat could always block. So, kings could bet 230 instead of 450 or something like that. So I don't have, really deep insights into this player, but I'm very concerned at the time this hand is played about my opponent's nut ratio. Some people might say, wouldn't he check raise the flop with Jack X? Not necessarily at all. Lots of people won't check raise the flop with Jack X, particularly in multi-way pots. But also, on a board texture like this one, it makes lots of sense it can make lots of sense to have a pretty robust call percentage from Jack X. In small part because across both flop, turn, and river, my defending range ends up being quite Jack X heavy itself. So if I get check raise on the flop, barreled into on the turn, and then barreled into on the river, a large fraction of my defending strategy will be a jack. So Jack X will be indifferent. There will be an allocation to both call and raise on the flop from my opponent with the Jack X part of his range. So I'm basically using this raise sizing because I think the nut ratio is really high. And again, I just wanted to, you can throw this back to the toy game models that you've seen where when your opponent is just really likely to have the nuts and you're looking at raising strategy, you saw a lot of min raising. I just wanted you guys to see a hand where that was played quite some time ago, where I deployed exactly that methodology to determine what bet sizing I would use. So that's what's really important is just showing you guys how the toy game models translate to just real-time play, range on range. So with that, we can go ahead and take a look at the next one.